ISO FileMaker Magazine, the professional's resource for FileMaker know-how. Alright, well hello there and welcome back to yet another FileMaker tutorial video. My name is Matt Petrowski, bringing you these tutorials over at my magazine website, FileMakerMagazine.com. In this video tutorial, we're taking a look at a very interesting and very necessary topic, and that is doing a performance review. We're going to be using some tools that we have available to us in order to assess the performance of our database. Now, a lot of FileMaker databases, as they have evolved, have been created with older technologies that were not available in more current versions of FileMaker. So it always behooves you, if possible, to be able to go through a database and assess its performance and figure out where you can actually improve things so that you get much quicker, speedier, faster responsive databases. Let's take a look at what I'm talking about. All right, so the first thing that I've done is I've loaded one of the default FileMaker starter solutions. Not to say that this is a bad solution, because it's a very pretty, well-designed solution, but it is not a solution that would necessarily perform very well. And we'll walk through this and take a look at why. Now, if you want to follow along, which you are perfectly welcome to do, just go up to the File menu in your more recent copies of FileMaker Pro, that's either 13 or 14, and choose this option, New from Starter Solution. What you're going to do is you're going to choose the Invoices solution, save that somewhere on your computer, and then you're going to be able to walk through exactly what I'm doing, and I'll show you how I use the tools that I have, all of which are free, except for the fact that you'll need FileMaker Advanced, and we'll be able to do a little bit of a performance review on this. Now, the first thing that we want to see is right off the bat, it's a beautiful design, but there's going to be some very immediate clues that we can get when we simply go into layout mode and see what's going on with a particular layout. Let's take a look. Heading into layout mode, the very first thing that we're going to see is we're going to see a lot of these right here. These are not necessarily a very good thing. Whenever you see the orange-yellow magnifying glass as opposed to the green magnifying glass, what that means is that those fields that are being searched are either unstored fields or they are coming from a related database. Now, if they're coming from a related database, that's not a problem because those fields could very well be indexed. For example, if we were to go into find mode on this particular layout and search this field right here, which is item, this particular search icon is simply representing that searching item in this particular context, which happens to be an invoice, means that I'm going to be searching a related field that is indexed. However, this field that we have right here, company, searching this is actually going to search an unstored calculation. That's going to be a very slow search, and the increasing number of records that we have, when we hit 100, 1,000, 10,000, the searches are going to eventually hit a point where things are just going to crawl. So ultimately, the first visual clue that we are given by FileMaker itself is all of these orange magnifying glasses. Now, if you don't know how to turn those on, you're going to find that under the View menu. And the View menu is going to have the Show option or the Show submenu. And what we're looking at out of all of the options is right underneath this line, we're looking for a number of different things. That is, we want to see what Quick Find shows us about our fields and whether those are turned on. We also want to see conditional formatting right here. And it's also a good idea to see the hide condition as well as your script triggers, etc. You can basically turn on all of these. Placeholder text will be available in FileMaker 14 and higher. Now, the dead giveaways to us in terms of the performance of a given layout are the facts that whenever FileMaker has to evaluate a layout, it has to evaluate all of the things on that layout and all of the calculations within that layout. So as I zoom out here, just a very quick visual inspection shows me that we are using quite a lot of hide calculations, meaning all of those calculations are going to have to be evaluated. So I really need to start to assess how much hiding do I need, how much conditional formatting do I need, and out of all of these fields that have Quick Find turned on, which ones of them are unstored versus actually related fields that might be indexed, because those unstored calcs are going to take a long time to search. Now, I'm going to give you some solutions to a lot of these problems. Some of them have been possible all the way back to FileMaker 10, 11, 12, etc. Some of them only more recently available, and that is because of FileMaker 14. Now, in this particular case, we can see right here that we've got this little text item right here, and this text item is using the hide calculation, which was available in FileMaker 13, I believe, but that could actually be turned into using placeholder text, which is available in FileMaker 14. So already we would reduce this one text object and take off a particular calculation. The calculation which can be seen in the Data tab over in this Hide Object Win. Now, a lot of the times your calculations when you're using the hides, the conditional formattings, those can be pretty simple. In this case, we're using an internal FileMaker function of getWindowMode equal to 0, and that's a browse mode. But we have a not empty. The one thing you need to remember is each time that these calculations grow in their complexity, it is cumulatively adding to all of the things that FileMaker has to do within your database. So we want to be a little judicious in terms of how we use those things. But by far, the biggest thing that's going to slow down our database is unstored calculations. Now, before we move off of Quick Find and using it as a very preliminary determiner of what's going on, I want to show you how I actually prefer to do Quick Find. This is a nice little tip that you can do. In my solutions, I like to have full control. I like to control what is going to go within Quick Find and what is not. I've shown this in a couple other videos. But when you throw a field by default on a FileMaker layout, FileMaker inherently, let's say it's the date, FileMaker inherently assumes that you want your FileMaker database to be as user-friendly according to FileMaker's terms as possible. It does not treat this as a developer environment. So by default, Quick Find is turned on, and that's right here in the Data tab of the inspector, if you don't know where it already is. So zoom in here. The one thing you either want to do is you want to uncheck this for your fields, and then explicitly only check it on those fields that you do want to support within Quick Find. And Quick Find can be controlled or accessed. Let's go back into browse mode. Either in the default FileMaker bar right up here, or you can actually use a global field or any other standard field and still access and run Quick Find. So it's an extremely useful feature, being able to have one Google-like search box in order to search across multiple fields. But we want to make sure that we have control. So by turning this off on this one field, I now am saying, okay, I'm going to have to go through all the fields that I want to actually set and have Quick Find turned on. Well, I really don't want to do that by clicking on each field and going through all the fields. Here is a trick that you can do. Under the option to select items, I forget which one it is, this select all right here actually, Command A. If I hold down the Option key, what you're going to see is that FileMaker on the Macintosh, I don't know what the modifier key is on Windows, but you can use it. It says Select Same. So it's a nice little trick that you can use, and I have now selected all fields on this layout at one time. I love doing things by bulk in FileMaker, so you can see right here as I zoom in, it is a dash or a slash check, meaning some of them are checked, some of them are not, but I can very easily uncheck all fields. So what happens is I have now turned off Quick Find for all of these, meaning company name and all of these others would not be searched. I don't know why these didn't actually get selected unless the Quick Find is actually, they are grouped objects. I would need to ungroup those right there. Sometimes you can have Quick Find on merge fields as well. In fact, that is my particular trick that I like to do. Once I've turned Quick Find off, and I'm not going to take the time to turn it off here, what I like to do is simply go over and type in text Quick Find and then use my merge option. So under here under the insert menu, I now have this option that is available to me that says insert a merge field. And the cool thing about Quick Find is Quick Find also applies to merge fields. So on this particular layout now, I can electively choose which fields are going to be supported within Quick Find. Let's just choose the date, and then we'll merge, I don't know, the status, and then we will merge some other field. Well, in this case, let's go company. I know that company is a bad field to search on, and we're going to see why. But what I'm able to do now is with this selected, you can see that even though the little magnifying glass is not showing up right now, we can see that with the field selected, the include field for quick find is actually selected for this text box because that is what's selected currently. So that's what allows me to fully control each and every field that I want. And any new field that I'm going to use on a layout, I'm typically doing an option drag, which is basically taking a copy of the field. The one thing you need to be aware of, especially with regards to performance, is when you are going to copy fields, FileMaker has so many items now that are associated specifically to a field, which include the name of the field, which if you drag it, we'll actually call it copy, the tooltip that may be on the field, you have the anchoring that's specific to the field, you have obviously styles, but then under data tab, you've got hide calculations, and you've got now placeholder calculations, which can also be applied. Plus all of your field entry of whether it's usable in browse, find, the go to next using all of the different keys, and the do not apply visual spell checking. So make sure that you have, like, for example, a boilerplate field that doesn't have anything on it, that already has all of your default styles. And if you've got that just off to the side, then you can always just drag that in. And by default, your settings will be how you want them, including Quick Find being turned off. So that's basically how I like to use Quick Find, by turning it off in all of the fields. That's something that also increases performance because you're not necessarily going to be searching unstored fields. But that's where we get led into the next part, which is let's deal with unstored and deal with the biggest factor to why your FileMaker database may be slower than it already could be. All right, so now let's tackle those unstored calculations. Unstored calculations and aggregate functions, such as summary fields, are the biggest killer to performance in your FileMaker database. And there are some questions that you can ask where you can make some decisions that will really improve the performance of your database, because these are things that oftentimes you can store instead of having FileMaker generate them on a record-by-record basis. In particular, on this layout, when we go into our layout mode, we can see right off the bat that we have a number of quick finds which actually indicate to us that we might have some unstored calculations. In fact, company is an unstored, unindexed calculation. If I go into find mode and search on this field, it will be much slower than an indexed field. Also, we can see that we have a summary field here, but in this case, this summary field, if we were to look at it, is not an actual internal FileMaker summary field. It's just a text field named summary. The killer for us is this total right here. This total is an unstored calculation. And if I was looking in this database and wanted to do a find, and let's say, for example, search everything where an invoice total was over $100, then this would just be extremely slow. So our biggest goal is to remove or eliminate all of the unstored calculations as best as we can. And that's exactly what we're going to look at in the rest of this video. So when we go into our define fields, which whatever layout you're on, the managed database will open up to that particular database or that set of fields. That's a good thing to know if you don't already know it. Let me open up a new window, switch to another actual screen. Let's go to customers here. I don't know if you knew this. It's a great tip. If I am on invoices and I go Command-Shift-D or Control-Shift-D, notice it opens directly into customers, which is a really big help to me. If I switch over to a layout that is on a completely different table, it opens up into invoices. So it's always nice to have maybe a window open if you're dealing with multiple different tables and you just want to jump into those fields really quickly. Simply select on a window or open a window, go to that actual item. Whether you're doing design work in it or not, it makes it really handy to get in and out of looking at fields. So what we're going to do is the first thing we're going to do is a lot of the times you will have your fields sorted by field name. The very first thing we want to do is sort by field type. Once we have everything sorted by type, we can clearly go look at all of our calculations. Now, in this particular situation, this is not something that we want to see. We do not want to see this word unstored. In fact, if we can remove all of these calculations, then that would be extremely ideal. There are a number of ways that you can address unstored calculations, and they are as follows. This is not comprehensive. This is coming off of the top of my head. But the number one way that you can remove a potential unstored calculation is to make it an auto-enter calculation, just a standard calculation. By removing the calculation itself, you can also get the advantage of the purpose that it's being used for, which is typically for UI and display. And you can actually use, like, for example, a local variable or a global variable in order to show something on a layout by layout basis. You do need to remember that that is not window specific. In the case of an unstored calculation, that calculation, if I was to open the invoices layout and then open a new window and go to a different record from the invoices layout, this particular calculation would still update. If I was using a local or global variable, that of course is global to the whole file and it would not be reflective of each of the individual windows. So you really need to make a decision of whether or not you're building a multi-window solution or not. If you're not building a multi-window solution, many times there are unstored calculations that you can get rid of and replace those with merge variables. A very good solution in many cases. Another option that you have is that you can actually simply bypass using an unstored calculation completely if you integrate it into your user interface, depending on the version of FileMaker that you're using. In this case, company, which is what we're going to be taking a look at. When we double click and see this, we can see that this field is clearly used for the purpose of UI. We are simply saying that if the customer's company is empty, then we're going to show this nice little user prompt that says, let's show the company name. Otherwise, let's show the customer's company. Now, as a newer FileMaker developer, I would say to myself, oh, this is cool. I love FileMaker's calculation engine, and this is exactly what I can use it for. Well, the very reason why we don't want to use this is because if this field is on the layout, and if it becomes part of our search functionality, we need to know that we are searching an unstored calculation. In fact, if we go down to the very bottom here, if you've never visited this area, the storage options, we cannot uncheck this. We simply cannot check this to make it an indexed field. And that is because of what it's doing in terms of how it's generating its result. So we are going to actually remove this from the database entirely. But before we remove anything from our existing working database, we always want to go through the process of making sure that what we're removing will not impact our workflow or how the database is actually working. So the first step that we're going to do is we're going to need to do a little bit of performance review from the standpoint of using a few tools. Let's take a look. Now, there are a number of tools that you can use in order to look at and assess the complexity and the dependencies within a FileMaker solution. There is Inspector Pro from Beeswax, and then there's also Base Elements from Goya. Now, those are two paid solutions, but we're taking a look at some of the tools that we have available. One of which is built into FileMaker that's simply using the DDR, but also these tools are very helpful to me when I'm doing an assessment of a solution. And that is FMXray Specs and FMXray Tables. They may not be super well known, but they are available. They are only on the Macintosh as far as I'm aware. But the developer of these two tools is creating a new tool that's going to be available at some point in the future, which integrates their functionality and does a lot more in terms of assessing and determining your database. And that probably will be a paid solution. But for right now, these are freely available and very helpful. Let's take a look at how to use them. As well, let's take a look at using the DDR in order to determine whether or not we can do something to our field. Because remember, our whole goal is to eliminate or reduce all of these fields that say unstored. Anything that's unstored, we want to get out of our database if at all possible, because what we would like is a very narrow table. A narrow table is that selection of fields right there. It's just the fields that are actually storing data and used within our schema and structure, not used for our UI purposes. A very wide table is all of these fields right here, because what happens is I keep adding fields for the purpose of UI or for little things. In this particular case, you'll find a lot of things where we have plurals right here, result label plural, invoice label plural. These again can be addressed typically with merge variables is my preferred solution, or which we're going to do with the case of companies as an example, turn it into an auto enter. So the first thing we want to know is we need to look at how many places company within the invoices table actually shows up. So if you have a copy of FileMaker Advanced, you should be aware, you probably are, of the database design report. You're simply going to load that up. However many files you have open will be all checked. In this case, I only have the one database. I can include all of the items in my report, which is pretty typical, or I can deselect those I don't want. The report format that I'll be using is going to be HTML, and that's because I'm going to be using a browser to look at this information. If I'm going to be using Inspector Pro or Base Elements, then I'm going to be selecting XML because that's the format that those tools use in order to import. Here using HTML, I will obviously choose to automatically open the report when done. Now there's two different browsers that I use in order to search. My default browser or my personal browser is the Safari browser that comes with the Mac, but I also use Chrome, and I'll show you why. In fact, here are the URLs. I'll go ahead and address those really quickly here on screen. Let's see if this actually shows up. I'm trying to show this on screen for you. I'll have to zoom that in. That'll also be a link on the article as well. It's workflowdata.com/fmxrayspecs.html. And likewise, there's a companion one, which is the FMXray Tables. That also is at workflowdata.com/fmxraytables.html. So with the database design report exported, you might think that the first place that I want to go is I'm dealing with a field, and I'm going to go to Fields, and then I want to find the company table. Well, this is a little bit of a hassle because what happens is when you click on Fields, FileMaker actually takes you to the Fields section where it's going to list all of the table names. Now, there's one thing that FileMaker could really spend a minimal amount of time and hire somebody either internal or external, and that is to actually improve the HTML/CSS and inclusion of JavaScript within their own DDR report. This is very basic and hasn't been updated for years and years, and it's not really that easy to read. It's nice that they've got all kinds of cross-linking within the file, within the HTML, but you can see that the table name is not any larger than the field names. Nothing stands out. It's not easy to visually see out of all of the information what's going on. As you scroll, you notice that the headers go away. They could lock those into a static position so that no matter what I scroll down, however far, I still know that this is the layouts column, this is the scripts column, etc. So it takes a little bit of time, unfortunately, to become familiar with the DDR. Also, there are JavaScript technologies where they would be able to have a search box, and it would be able to search and filter out items within this HTML. Ultimately, this could be vastly improved with modern-day technologies, making it easier for people to assess their own databases. But looking for the company field, we're going to click on Tables first, then we're going to go to the Invoices and click on the 33 fields. That's going to jump us within the Fields section to the proper table area, which we can then scroll down to and actually look at Company. So what we have right here is Company is telling us, there's the calculation that we have available to us. It's telling us that it's only repetition, one repetition, it does not store, and the index language is English. Now, all of this information is nice and useful here in the browser, and we have a really nice search functionality. In fact, if I wanted to see, these are all of the layouts that are contained, that are using, or where this particular field is shown. So I'm just going to copy this since FileMaker doesn't give me a count. I'll switch over to a text editor like Wrangler, and I'll just paste it. And I'm just going to use the line number count in order to visually get an idea. Okay, this field is used 14 times. Because FileMaker did not conveniently tell me that in the DDR. I can also see that it's also used within one script. Now, of course, I can click on this, and then I can read this script and see where and how it's used within all of the steps, and then just use the back button to jump back to see what's going on. And on each of these, I can click and see information and just go back to them. But this isn't an interface that's as easy to navigate. So let's take a look at something that we can use, which is the FMXray Tables. Now, the tables is going to give us insight about the metadata of our FileMaker solution. The FMXray specs is going to give us metadata and information about fields that are used from the perspective of a given layout. So if you have a particular layout that is slow, then it may not be that there's something inherently wrong with the table. It may be that you've got too many different things or too many different calculations on the particular layout. And what are those calculations doing? For example, the conditional formatting and the hide calculations and all of the things that FileMaker is calculating out. When we open the FMXray tables, the way that this works is there's just a blank window that we're going to see. We go over to our FileMaker solution. We open up the defined database, and in this case, I go over to tables. I can just do a Command or Control A to select all, and I can click the copy option down here in the bottom. So when I click copy, those are now on the clipboard. And the great thing about FileMaker is that everything that's on the clipboard is in a parsable XML format. So when I click refresh here, we can see that what's happened is this FMXray Tables application has grabbed all of that metadata and now allows me to filter things down pretty quickly. In fact, I now have the ability to look across my whole solution a little bit easier than if I was to do it just within FileMaker. That's because I can say I don't want to see any of the tables except for the invoices table, and then I want to be able to do my sorting and look at things. For example, the field type. I can see how many of these are calculated right here between these two. Also, when selecting on this, I can actually look at the calculations, and if I have familiarity with the solution, I can sort of assess what is the weight or the impact of that particular calculation. Is it doing something just for the purpose of UI, or is that actually doing something in terms of displaying data? Now, up here in this menu, we have all of these different options of what do we want to see. Do we want to see the calculations? Do we want to see the auto enters? Sometimes very useful. Do we want to see the auto enters, which are lookups? Do we want to see validation, or do we want to see storage? Now, storage is our important item because I can see right here when I have all of these calculated items, I can see that out of all of the calculated items that I have, only 3 of them are actually indexed according to the index field right here. All of the rest of these can be presumed to be unstored, but I really don't know unless I actually look at the unstored flag setting within FileMaker. And we already know over in invoices, when we look at invoices, we have a lot of unstored, and we want to get rid of those. And that's exactly what we're going to do. Likewise, with the FMXray tables, we can also use the FMXray specs in order to see what's going on the actual layout. So for example, let's go over to our detail layout. The way that this works is we'll go over to the FMXray specs. I'll open that up. That again creates a blank window, which we simply need to copy something which includes FileMaker metadata onto the clipboard. So I'm going to select everything here. Now, instead of doing the Command or Control A, which would grab all of my off-screen data as well, many times you need to marquee around what you do want to grab. Copy that, go over, click your clipboard refresh, and it will load everything into your window. Now, what's really nice is in this one, we've got this option to show and hide a drawer. And we can take a look by turning off all non-fields and looking at just specific fields. We can see all of the information at a glance. It's a lot easier. How many of our fields out of all of the fields on this layout have a tooltip? Well, there's only 1. How many out of all of these fields are accessible within browse mode? Within find mode? How many of them are using value lists? What is their format? Things that aren't necessarily as helpful, but out of here you can dig things. For example, the queue find, we can see that we only have a small number because of the changes that I made. Ultimately, our goal is to find out how many places and where fields are used. Now, in a complex FileMaker layout, the problem becomes when you have popovers, sliders, tab panels, and everything else, how do you find out where a particular item is, especially when you're going to come across this particular instance? Watch what happens as I add a new slide control. And this is a very common problem when it comes to performance and tracking things down, if you don't know that this is what needs to be done. Some developers may do this. I'm going to grab a new field. I'm going to put it on the layout, and I'm going to make it that unstored company field. And it has quick find turned on. I have a slider that I have here, and let's say I'm working on this slider, and I've got company, and for some reason, some developer comes into this solution and does this. Resizes that down, and then decides to actually make their design and go forward with it just like this. Now the problem is when this gets moved onto the layout, I don't know why the info didn't get added, but there we go. It's now contained within the object. The problem is that field that was included in this, that is off to the side, right there, company, is hidden in essence. And I've seen this happen a number of times. So that when you select all, you see the outline of it quite clearly right here, but you never know quite how to access it. You can sit here and try to marquee around this particular area until you're blue in the face, but you will never be able to select that field because it has been somehow obscured within one of FileMaker's containment objects. So if I was to select all of this layout now, copy this, go over to the FMXray specs and refresh my clipboard or grab the new clipboard, what I'm going to be able to do is I'm going to be able to find that company name field. So here I'll sort on this, and I can see that the company name actually appears 4 different times. But I can see using the object hierarchy, oops, I accidentally sorted that. The object hierarchy here is telling me that this is on a slider. But what's really nice about FMXray specs is when I double click this, it's telling me where the location of that field is by this little highlight. I can see quite clearly that it's on the layout right there. Of course, I could when I did a select all, but I didn't necessarily know it was contained within that object unless I was able to see right here that the object hierarchy says that the slider is containing it. So that gives me the clue of how to pull out where this item is. So our goal now is to make this become going from an unstored calculation, something that cannot be searched well, something that is not stored in the database in a clean fashion, and convert it into something that makes for a much more performant database. Let's do that now. All right, so let's fix the problem. First off, I need to make a decision. What is this particular field being used for? In this case, it's being used for UI. When I take a look at the field and I look at company, I can see that the real only functionality that's being used is I'm wanting to display company name. But it's adversely impacting my database because when I search for this field, I'm searching on an unstored field. Now, what is it referencing? Well, it's referencing the customer's company, a related field. So in this case, I would rather have on the layout the related field itself because that can still be searched, but the company name, for the purpose of actually displaying that, I would much rather integrate that into the user interface. Now again, there's always more than one way to solve a particular problem. And the problem that could be here, that this is not a stored field. The easiest way to make this a stored field is to simply convert it into an auto-enter field. So I'm going to copy this calculation just for the sake of saving it. It actually isn't necessary because FileMaker will remember this even when I change the calculation type. The calculation will still there, or excuse me, the field type. So when I change this to a text field, and I click Change, when I go into the options for that field, and I click on the calculated value, you'll see that FileMaker will still remember the calculation that was there when the field was a calculated field. The great advantage that we have here now is that this field, now being a normal text field, instead of an unstored calculation field, is going to be searchable and going to instantly be indexed. That's going to reduce it's going to increase the performance and reduce the workload on my layout as a whole. That's the number one thing that you can do with a lot of unstored calculations that are totaling things up. For example, if we take a look at this, and we also want to make sure that we uncheck the do not replace existing in this particular calculation. Reason being is that anytime that customer's company is going to be empty, it would actually say company name. That means that if I deleted the company name from the customer's company name would become empty on this particular field. Otherwise, it's going to automatically enter into the field the company name, exactly what auto enter says, which means it's going to then be stored. If this is checked, then that means it's only going to happen the first time that this calculation is evaluated and no other times. So I want it to actually work with the changes when the data is changed. In fact, if you don't already know this, this is a particular trick that you can do, is you can use a let function with FileMaker, and you can simply just define a field called trigger, and you can say equal to any field that you want. For example, if I wanted the company name to be re-looked up or re-auto-entered, setting it to company name if it was empty or the company name coming from customers, if I wanted to do that for some reason on some other random field, let's say on the date field, this calculation means that if I was to take the if as a result of the let function now, this calculation is basically saying if there are two fields that are modified, if I modify the date field or I modify the customer's company, any field that is referenced will actually cause the auto enter to re-trigger. That's a very useful piece of knowledge when it comes to using a let function and specifying however many trigger fields you want in order to trigger that auto enter, even if the fields are not inherently associated to what it is that you're calculating out. A very cool piece of information knowledge when it comes to FileMaker. But again, there's multiple ways that I could solve this, and in particular when it comes to things like this, the total field. You always have to ask yourself, if I'm going to put a total in here, do I really need this to be an unstored total, totaling up the subtotal and the tax? Because the true question here is, when an invoice is modified, when somebody changes line items or when they change other items, are there other opportunities for me to calculate this value and then store it? Have it be stored as opposed to unstored? And the answer to that question is yes. There are multiple opportunities for you to actually do those types of processes. Number one is you have your auto enter. But in the case where auto enter actually doesn't work, and in some cases you don't want to use it, what you can do is you can take advantage of FileMaker's user interface objects such as triggers. If a user is only ever in one particular layout, within that layout you can use the onCommit trigger that when the record is committed, you update forcibly all of your totals and you put those pieces of data, aggregate or otherwise, into stored fields. That means that the only other time that that data is going to be changed is when the user interacts with that data on a particular layout. The only time that you really need an unstored calculation is if you need to actually show something every time where there is going to be no user interaction and you're willing to take the performance hit for that unstored calculation. So in the case of this database, tax would get converted to be stored for me. Total would get converted to be stored. Subtotal would get converted in order to be stored. And these would all happen either based on an auto-enter basis or based on user interaction using a script trigger on a commit event within the user database. Doing that would significantly increase the performance of this particular database. All right, so what we've done is we've already made this one field much nicer in terms of the performance of my database. But again, I have more questions for myself. Even though I've converted this company field to be a stored field with what clearly shows as an indexable field now according to QuickFind, I need to ask myself the question, do I even need this field? In other words, this field was purely a UI field, and I have to ask myself whether it even needs to be a field. In this particular case, the calculation itself, when you take a look at this, is actually referencing the customer's company field. So that's where the true company name is coming from. And this particular field is actually taking the opportunity to simply say, if it's empty, then I want to show something else. Well, my question becomes, why can't I just show that on the layout itself by default without even having the calculation here in the first place? Because I can clearly show a related field. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how I would probably solve this. Rather than keeping the field, my goal is to eliminate as many out of those unstored calculations as possible. So I'm going to drag a company's customer or a customer's company field over here, where that's the actual value that would be shown. And just for grins, I'm going to simply use my styles or my appearance, adopt all of my styles and simply apply it to my field. So I'm not having to do that. I'll even make the field the same size. As such, I'll move the original, what was an unstored field. Actually, let's go ahead and use the same field as my placeholder and align it right on top. Select that, send it to the back, bring it to the front right there. So I know it's a little bit confusing what I'm doing, but you can see right there what I did is I said, I don't want this field in my database anymore. I simply want to show the company name. I'm going to get rid of this particular field because we could use a file or this text object because we could use FileMaker's new functionality of the placeholder text, and I could simply put in the placeholder here of company. Very nice feature. And I don't want field, so I'm going to need to add quotes on that, which I just did. So that will display company. I can get rid of that. That did come with a hide calculation, but likewise, what was being shown was company name. So here's where I get to integrate this directly into my layout. Rather than having a calculation, unstored at that, do what I wanted it to do, I'm going to integrate it into the UI. So again, I'm going to use my appearance. I'm going to copy this here and apply so that it actually just shows company name. I'll move that up and over. And here is how I would solve the problem. I would simply have company name be evident and visible right here, and then I would take advantage of FileMaker's calculation engine. That's where I can basically use the hide here. There's a couple of ways that I can do this. If I don't have access to FileMaker 13 with the hide, FileMaker 12 and earlier would still be able to do this with conditional formatting. In this case, I can use the hide, and I can simply hide this as soon as this value does have a value. Or if I'm using FileMaker 12, then what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to make this field originally, under the appearance, have a fill of none, meaning I'm going to be able to see through this field. Let's send that to the back and bring it up and align it down so that we can see what's going on with the new record. We can see that we actually have our placeholder text is overlaying, which is in gray, our actual item underneath that's showing. With FileMaker 12, as soon as there's a value in here, a company name within that field, you could use your conditional formatting. So that is accessible right here by right-clicking conditional formatting. You're going to then have a somewhat similar calculation, which is going to say to the effect, the whole if is empty, the company name. With conditional formatting, you can actually say if the value is empty here, then you can actually put on a fill color on the field that matches your background. Now, unfortunately, it will not work with gradients, which I believe this is a very subtle gradient right here. It works well with solid colors if you're going to take the conditional formatting approach. If you're going to use the newer feature of the hide, then that's all good because you can simply hide that and not even need it. So what you've ultimately done is you've now said, I now have this company field, which I no longer even need. I'm going to simply delete that. And that's presuming you've gone through your DDR, you've looked at all of the other places where it's used, you've visited all the different layouts, you're comfortable deleting the field, changing it to the related field of the customer's company, and you're good to go. Walk through all of your unstored calculations, and if your goal is to get rid of those or bare minimum convert them into auto enter, if you have a very trim field where everything can be indexed, then you are going to have a FileMaker database that's going to perform much better than a FileMaker database that has a wide array of unstored calculations, especially if those calculations are being used for the purposes of searching. All right. So I hope throughout the course of this video, you've been able to get a much better sense of how you can go through your database and look for problem areas such as non or bad performing fields, fields that are unstored, summary fields that could possibly be moved into stored fields, and a little bit of understanding about the fact that if you make more tables that are more narrow, your database is going to perform better than if you have a lot of wide tables with a lot of extraneous unstored calculations. Again, your whole goal here is to present a clean interface with a very trim database that performs really fast so users can get to the information that they want to get to. As we switch between here, I've taken advantage of FileMaker's hide functionality. I am hiding the actual company name, the little label that is directly on the layout underneath. And if the field is there, then the field is going to show and that label is going to be hidden underneath, providing the exact same functionality with the ability to completely remove that unstored calculation. And of course, going into find mode, I would still be able to enter into this and actually do a search. You can see that I forgot to put the apply in find mode on my calculation, but even still, I can solve that problem and I would be able to search for whatever I want to search for and it would actually come up, finding my one record out of the two, looking exactly for the company name, which is a related field. So again, as always, I wish you much luck with your own FileMaker development, and until next time, happy FileMaking. We hope you've enjoyed this video tutorial, and we'd like to say thank you for your subscription and your support. If you're not already a subscriber, head on over to www.filemakermagazine.com/subscribe for more information about the benefits of joining.